Hi everyone, this is Dr. Dave O'Connell with a really short course on conflict called Conflict. You Really Do Have Choices. I'm glad you took a little bit of time to join in with me in this course, and I hope you get a few good tips, a few good nuggets, a few good insights about your own conflict style, the options that you have within conflict styles that are available to you, and feel a little bit better equipped for dealing with that thing that we all deal with every day in our lives, some form of conflict. Now, if you look within the folder for the class, you'll see you have a note page, kind of something like this, that you could use if you'd like to fill in. This is kind of a guideline for the little mini course. There are note pages. That's basically a 3-up copy of the slides that I'm using in this presentation that you can use to fill in notes if you'd like to. And in the directions for the course, you'll see that you'll be taking a conflict assessment. If you haven't already done that, then I suggest you just stop the video right now and go and do the conflict assessment with that link to the United States Institute for Peace, which graciously let us use the link to their assessment form. And you'll end up being able to print out a report that looks something like this with how you most often tend to respond to the kind of situations that are posed in the assessment. You don't get just one score, you get kind of percentages on 5 different styles. So hope you have those materials at hand. We're going to head on through this information. Hope you find yourself equipped to understand these 5 main conflict styles, that you end up with the ability to really understand maybe the couple that you are most frequently tend to use, and be able to have some tips for applying them as you go on away from this course. All right, conflict, that's a big word. And I encourage you to just pause for a moment, maybe use that note page, and just write down what comes to mind. Is there a phrase? Is there a word? Is there an image that comes to mind for you when you see or hear the word conflict? Go ahead, write it down. Okay, there's a wide variety of ways that people respond to this, and being that this isn't a class where everyone's meeting at the same time, we can't share all of the things that you wrote down, but hold on to what you wrote down and just consider in view of the other ways we might be looking at the topic here. Now, for some of us, we think of conflict as explosive, it's hot, like volcanic, like this picture, and that's understandable. Often there's something a little bit tense that comes to mind when we hear the word conflict, or we consider ourselves going into a time of conflict. At the same time, I'd like you to take from this brief session the possible positive effects of healthy conflict that's managed well. So here we really mean when there's different viewpoints and a certain kind of tension emerges, what good could come out of diving into that? Well, you can end up with an improved relationship if you actively and in a healthy way engage in conflict. You can have solutions to problems that you didn't have before you were willing to step in and really work through the issues. It's part of creativity at times, is by pushing and pulling and exchanging ideas around an issue or a set of issues. You can come up with some new ideas. You could have new innovation, a new way of doing things, and you can grow as a person by effectively navigating conflict. Now, we know that you might have a major tendency. Are you someone who tends to lean into conflict and say, well, let's discuss this issue. Let's really dive into it and work through our differences. Are you someone who more tends to lean away from conflict, maybe avoid it? If there's a way to get through an issue without really figuring everything out, you just want to get through it. And all of us probably have felt a bit of each of these over time, but you probably have one more stronger tendency than another, leaning in or leaning away from conflict. That's a very simple way of thinking about conflict style as we're going to unpack it in this course. Now, I'd like you to think about a particular conflict story just to help you process this information. Is there a time, kind of a situation where you were in conflict, or maybe you are right now in conflict? Just think about it. Who were the people? What are the issues? What's the context where it's happening? How has the conflict been handled? Or is it being handled right now? So think about a particular issue as you work through this material. I want you to come away with a strong view that you have choices, and that done at its best, often conflict resolution has some attention to the outcomes desired by each party. We know that varies in the different ways conflict unfolds, but that's often a high value aspect of resolving and managing conflict. So here's a definition. I'm sure there could be many, many definitions. This is one from someone called Ken Thomas, who wrote a lot about conflict. He says it's the process that begins when one party perceives that the other has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that he or she cares about. Okay, I'm going to highlight several of these words in the next slides. Process. So conflict isn't by itself an emotion, it's a process, right? So things happen during a conflict episode or a series of episodes. There's things that go on. And sometimes as it follows the stages of conflict, it seems like it's a pretty straight road and things are handled in a pretty straightforward way and without a lot of bumps in the road. Other times it might be pretty complex, and there might be something that goes on for a while and takes a number of different convenings to resolve effectively. But however it unfolds, this is a very general map of what happens. Something occurs that grabs our attention, and we develop an intention, which is maybe kind of a feeling and a direction, and we take then some behaviors, could be conversations or actions we take that lead to interactions, and there can be cycles of this that go on multiple times. So the definition included the idea of parties, when one party impacts another party's areas of concern, and those are just the individual people, or they could be individual entities like departments or whole teams or whatever. But the parties, and they perceive, so I perceive that someone's kind of pushing up on something that I'm really concerned about. That's one of my interests. It doesn't mean I'm always accurate about my perception, but I think that that's happening, or I feel quite sure that it's happening perhaps, and that it's going to be at a loss or a negative impact to me. And so this idea of something that he or she cares about is really equal to that person's interests. Now, we use the word interest here, indicating what your real concerns are. When you're in a dispute, or maybe even a formal negotiation, you might have interests that you want to achieve, but it might not be the same as the position you take, demanding a price or saying you won't do less than, and so forth. But your actual interest behind that might be a little bit different. So conflict is looked at many ways, but one useful way of separating it is task conflict, which I'm representing with that check mark, or relationship conflict, which actually doesn't look like a conflict in this picture, but it's about two people, or it could be a number of parties. And often it's said that task conflict can be very, very good, right? Focusing on an issue, a set of issues, something that needs to be done, something we really need to work on. And relationship conflict can become difficult if it becomes personalized, right? It becomes less about solving problems and coming to a shared understanding than it is about you as an individual, and becomes kind of personal in a negative way. So being willing to dive into conflict in a healthy way is captured in this brief statement by Patrick Lencioni, who's written a lot about teams and conflict and jobs. He says the lack of conflict around ideas ferments into conflict around people. So that's really what I was trying to illustrate with the picture that preceded this. So when you think about your story, I asked you to consider a moment ago, who are the people? What are the issues? And do you have an idea of the other party's interests? And have you clarified your own? And can you appreciate the styles that each of you bring to the conflict conversations? So here's a key tip when you're working through a conflict. If it's on the fly, you obviously couldn't sit to the side and do this, but if it's something that's you've got to dive into multiple times, can you get yourself separated from it enough to be able to describe it in a neutral way? It's an interesting exercise to say, if I were just observing this conflict that I'm having, how would I describe it? Trying to take my own feelings out of it temporarily to be a little bit more objective, as much as we're able to when we're in a time of conflict. So you might even consider writing down a neutral statement of conflict on your note page where this slide is showing up. You might want to pause the video and do that as you think about your own story. So a key tip here is you have choices. At times we feel like, well, I tend to avoid conflict. I can't go in there. I can't deal with it. I can't confront, or I just blow up. I always blow up, and I'm very aggressive, and I'm highly competitive, and that's just who I am. Now, there probably are tendencies that you have around conflict, and we're going to look at these styles in just a moment, but you do have choices as how you interact with others and how you choose to resolve conflict. And the better you become skilled at making good choices and realizing you can control your own conflict style, oh boy, the better off you're going to be in so many different facets of your life here on campus at St. Ambrose and all other places in your life. Now, conflict can bring to mind something that's maybe very intense, could have a highly personal element. I'm trying to illustrate that idea of two people in conflict here. It doesn't mean they're highly competitive, but you can see that there's concern expressed in their body language, in their the way the hands are held, the facial expressions. You can kind of read conflict a bit just by looking at people. Now, I'd like you to make sure that you have taken the conflict style assessment. There's a link in the document, the note page that I gave you, that has click conflict assessment here. Perhaps you've already done it and you already have a written report. You'll be able to print a report after you answer those 30, make those 30 choices, those 30 short questions, and you'll get a report that you can take a look at and maybe even look at as I describe these different styles coming up here right away. So it's a terrific opportunity. This link was made available to us. I checked with the United States Institute of Peace and had formal permission given to use this, share the link, and it was very generous on their part to do that. So here's the basic grid for understanding the conflict styles. On the y-axis, we're thinking about assertiveness. How assertive am I in conflict from low to high? And the x-axis is how cooperative do I tend to be? And from low to high, going from left to right. Okay, the first conflict style is compete. Sometimes it's called competition or competitiveness. And this is when we're really going hard after our own interests. And you can see where it is on this grid that I am high on assertiveness and I'm low on cooperativeness. So I'm competing. I'm going to get a win for myself. Primarily, that's what this position means. Power is often part of it, power-oriented, defending positions and going for a win. Compromise. In this style, we're kind of in the middle. Somewhat cooperative, somewhat assertive. And often, this is looking for a mutual solution. And you'll notice where it comes on the grid, it really means we're partially satisfying both of the parties. I may not get everything I want, and you may not get everything you want, so we compromise. Sometimes we say split the difference, or a term like that. Now, in the upper right-hand corner, this is called a collaborative style. I believe your report will say problem solver or problem solving. And this is where you're both highly cooperative and highly assertive. Now notice we say assertive, we don't mean aggressive. We mean you're standing up for what you need to achieve and you're cooperative in helping the other party achieve what he or she needs to achieve. Typical of this is you develop skills to listen as much as you talk, or sometimes more. And both parties are going after what they need, and you're interested in your win and the other party's win. Down here in the lower right-hand corner, we have accommodate, and this is when you're highly cooperative, but you're not really pursuing your own interests. And there's times when you say, well, this really isn't of a big concern to me, it's of concern to the other party, and I'm just going to go with what they want to do. In that case, it wouldn't be negative necessarily at all, but if you really do have some concerns that you're not addressing, but you're accommodating, even though you know there's things you need to achieve in terms of achieving your own interests, that can be less productive. So it's really kind of a flip on competition, and you're helping the other person satisfy their concerns. Again, if it's a low, something where it's a very low concern on your part, you want to build kind of social capital, relationship capital, and this issue doesn't matter that much, there's nothing wrong with it, unless you really do need to pursue something and be more collaborative. Over in the lower left-hand corner is avoiding, and that's when you just don't want to get into the conflict. You're not really cooperative, you're not really assertive, just kind of leave me alone and let me get out of here. I'm not pursuing my concerns or yours, and I don't want to deal with it, right? Now, there's 5 of these styles, and you, in your printout, are going to have a percentage rating on each one. Now, you notice they don't add up to 100%. In fact, what this is really showing you is out of the different options that you're given as you go through that assessment, this versus this, how many times, what percent of the time do you choose the phrase that represents each of these 5 styles? So for instance, I went through the assessment and just to illustrate, not representing my own real sentiments, and I said, I'm going to pick the most assertive, competitive phrases each time through there. It's not really helpful to me individually because it's not the real thing. But when I did that, I got this outcome, that as a competer, it was 100%. And every time there was a competitive way of going at conflict, I chose that. And so I ended up with 100%, which is not my actual way of going at it. And when I did that, I ended up coming out with 70% uncompromising. I had like 55% on problem solving and 21% on accommodating. You can see on the other side of the page, I ended up with 8% avoiding. Again, these aren't my actual scores, but just want to help you understand when you look at those, it's giving you a read on out of the options, the times those options came up in the survey, how often you chose it. So you may have a score that's relatively even. You might have a 55, 42, 31, and so forth. And I'd like you to just consider what are your top two. This gives you an idea of what ones do you have a tendency to engage in most often, right? And I think it's really highly valuable as you consider your own story. What's your view towards collaboration as well as towards the others? I think if there are times to use each of those styles, but overall, I'd say developing an increasingly collaborative style, so you have that available to you to go after things collaboratively. It's going to be a great value to you. The questions around that would be, am I listening at least as much as I'm talking? Am I communicating effectively so they understand my interests? How would I know that? I'd ask them. Could you share with me what you think my main concerns are based on our conversation? Can I summarize what they said? Can I pause and say, here's what I understand you're telling me? And so you can get a bead on if you're understanding their interests as this discussion goes on. Is there a common ground? Do we need to split the difference? Are we going to temporarily step back from this and come back and meet again? But no matter what, I hope here at St. Ambrose that in every conflict exchange with fellow students, with employers, whatever, no matter what, am I treating the other person with dignity and respect, right? Asking questions, listening fiercely. And I'm sure you know this, that hearing something is just kind of a mechanical, biological thing, is sound going in my ear. But listening is a more active thing. It's, help me understand, and you're working at it if you're actually listening. And a key tip on listening is often pausing. If you got something that's kind of rising up that is going to be kind of inflammatory, say, to just pause and compose yourself. It doesn't mean you don't have something assertive that needs to be said, or just pausing to consider the next thing you're going to say and maybe break the pace of a conversation that's becoming a little too heated. So, two key takeaways, or maybe it's three key takeaways that I see for you in this, is that you hopefully develop a more positive mindset toward conflict. There really are positive outcomes from doing it well, and that you really do have options and choices to engage in conflict from these different perspectives, and developing both the attitude of engaging respectfully and fruitfully and building skill. Now, we can only go so far in this super short micro course, but I hope you'll watch out for opportunities to build your skills in using the 5 conflict styles, and especially in learning how to come to collaborative solutions as often as you can. I wish you the best in your studies at St. Ambrose and God's blessings along your way. Have a great day.